Yes, you
Okay. So good afternoon to one and all present here. I am Olivia, psychologist and trainee analyst at DeepRanjani Foundation, and I'm your host for the day. It's our privilege to welcome such huge number of audience in our webinars. Today, we are celebrating World Mental Health Day since September through our series on mental health and well-being. Today, we have Ms. Anisha Bhattacharya as our guest. We have ma'am to speak on the topic emotional.
almost a year now. So we have started with our series from last December 2022, and we have taken up various topics and themes upon which we have been having wonderful speakers with us to engage and enlighten us in various ways. And today we have a very special person who is especially very special to me since she has been my professor. And she's a clinical psychologist. She has her own startup, Healing Harmony, and she's right now teaching in Sister Nivedita University. Her ongoing research, as far as I know, is on non-suicidal self-harm, which is a very interesting and intriguing topic for the moment being. And ma'am has represented psychology department, her own work to various parts of the world. She has been invited as a speaker at international platforms as well as national and our very hometowns. So ma'am, we welcome you and thanks a lot for having the time over with us here today. And we cannot wait for you to speak on this very importantly intriguing topic, that is emotional regulation and resilience building. And so ma'am, yeah, the stage is yours. Please take it over from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priyanka, for this gracious welcome. You are the best host anyone could ask for. So we will start. Let me know if you can see the screen. Before we start, I would like to keep it as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, I think we already have some questions like that people have put up at the time of registration. So we will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation as well. But during the PPT as well, if you have any questions, if you have any queries, feel free to ask. I think Priyanka will help us coordinate with that. And let me know if you can see my screen. Is it visible, Priyanka?
Yes, it's visible now.
Okay. So as you know, this is a series that the DeepRanjani Foundation is organizing. And this is my topic for today, emotional regulation and resilience building. So firstly, this is an overview of what we will go through today. So firstly, what is emotional regulation to start with? What are the different aspects related to emotional regulation? Why are we talking about it in the first place? Why is it important? The glass can always be filled. So that's a different perspective, like from the glass is full or the glass is half empty, different from that. And some emotional regulation techniques that we can discuss or probably we can demonstrate while having the session today itself. And what is resilience? How do we build resilience? Now, to start with, we all know like these are the standard definitions of emotional regulation, but I'll tell you very interesting from the perspective of a clinical psychologist. We tend to see everything more from the clinical lens or from the pathological lens rather than the positive aspect of things. You know, it's quite common for us to concentrate more on the negative aspects or the pathological aspects than on the positive ones. Like that's the kind of training that we get. It's one of the loopholes for the training maybe. The reason why it's very interesting, even over Google, if you search the term emotional regulation, you will find more answers to emotional dysregulation than emotional regulation. So to start with, emotional regulation is defined as ways in which an individual can influence, manage, experience, and express their responses to internal or external events. And emotional dysregulation, the term which is so common, has actually been coined by someone that probably a lot of you might have heard of, Dr. Marshall Linehan. She is a psychologist. She developed dialectical behavior therapy for people with borderline personality disorder, or namely anyone who has a greater problem of emotional dysregulation. And the interesting thing is, this is something that she discovered while going through her own issues. She was someone who, by herself, was diagnosed with borderline personality. So that also gives us hope that we can find our own solutions if we are aware of our emotions, if we have greater emotional awareness, if we have greater insight about our problems. So the different aspects related to emotional regulation. So this term emotional regulation in the first place had become so common with DBT, with dialectical behavior therapy. And these are the three different aspects to it, which are very interrelated also. So the first is interpersonal effectiveness. The second is distress tolerance or reality acceptance skills. The third is emotional regulation, the one that we are going to focus on today, and 4 mindfulness skills. But when we go through it, you will see that both of these, like all 4 of these, are very interrelated. There are no ways in which you can put them in watertight compartments. Now, why are we talking about it in the first place? Like, why in the first place are we concentrating on emotional regulation? Why is that important? Because we see around us, and this is one topic that I'm really very passionate about personally also, that when someone has poor emotional regulation skills, it actually leads to a lot of unhealthy coping strategies. Deliberate self-harm, non-suicidal self-injury could be a part of these unhealthy coping strategies as well. It could lead to more disorders like depression, bipolar affective disorder, and a lot of trauma-induced conditions like dissociative disorders, non-suicidal self-injurious disorder, borderline personality disorder. And when we talk about dissociation, we are not only implying the diagnosable conditions. For instance, even things like maladaptive daydreaming, time lapses in your autobiographical memory, all of these count as dissociative phenomena. So it's very common, and this is something, the reason why we need to address. Now, the glass can always be filled. So I wanted this because this topic is a bit positively oriented. So I wanted to get out of the typical clinical perspective of things, that how things can go wrong and how you have to take charge of things and you have to work on it right now and right there, and come up with this perspective that it's never too late. The glass can always be filled, whether it is half full or half empty. It doesn't matter. You can fill it up anytime you want. And the reason why I say that is because of some good news that we have. And some of these good news is very recent. The first is the magic of neuroplasticity, that we have the ability to learn new things, and that's always there. We can unwire and rewire networks. So whatever bad habits you have, whatever coping strategies that you want to work on, you can unwire and rewire them anytime. And the ability to enhance existing cognitive capabilities, that is also a part of neuroplasticity. So it's almost like magic, that if you work on it, there are so many ways that you can change yourself, and strengthening areas where the function is lost or has declined. We know that. Another very interesting discovery in the recent years is that the legal age of adulthood is, of course, different, and it differs from country to country as well. But we know now, it is a fact, we know this now, that the prefrontal cortex, which is considered as our rational brain, the part which actually helps us with emotional regulation, helps us to have control, restraint over our emotions, that presumably goes on growing till the age of 25 or even more. So no wonder when we are teenagers, or we are just emerging adults, we are so impulsive because the prefrontal cortex is not really developed. So we always act from our emotional brain rather than our rational brain. And the last and probably the greatest good news. So we have all been, hearing these sort of things that around 30s and 40s, the brain starts to shrink, the brain volume starts to reduce, and then it's a doom. So whatever habits you have to work in your, late teens or maybe early teens, work in your early adulthood. But the brain can still keep on changing from the age of 25 to 65. So it's not a gone deal. You can work on it anytime that you want. And now we know how deeply related our actions, thoughts, behavior, and the neural network is. So these are certain good news why, it gives us hope that we can work on ourselves. Now we will come to some emotional regulation techniques. So for To start with these, maybe you guys will need to grab some pencil, pen, paper, colors, whatever you want. Can you do that? Okay. So Priyanka is already ready. I hope others are as well. Okay, so we'll just try a few. Okay, so firstly, to start with the goals of emotional dysregulation, what are we doing? We are trying to understand our emotions better, reduce our emotional vulnerability, and decrease our emotional suffering or pain, right? So these are the goals. So you will understand how these activities work around these goals when we go through it one by one. Now, this is the first one. Can you make a figure like this, like a body outline for yourself? You can share also if you want. Okay. Okay. So if you are done, try to figure out where do you feel these emotions in your body. So you can see there are certain emotions mentioned here. So there's love, there's joy, there's sadness, shame, fear, guilt, and anger. Where do you feel it in your body? If you can just, put certain symbols there, or maybe circle those parts, or put some flowers or whatever, in the places where you feel love, let's say, joy, whichever thing you think can symbolize these emotions. Okay, anyone wants to volunteer? Okay. Okay, so for example, if I talk about myself, uh, when there's a feeling of sadness, there's a sinking feeling around the chest. That's where I feel sad. When it's shame, I somewhat feel it inside the pit of my stomach or maybe the extremities of my limbs, and I want to just coil myself, like take that coiled position or the fetal position. So whatever comes to you, like there's nothing that, it has to be relatable to others. Just jot it down so that the next time you feel any overwhelming emotion, it could be love, it could be joy, it could be sadness, shame, fear, guilt, anger, whatever, you know when it's speaking in your body. Like, when you can feel those sensations in your body. Like a lot of times when we are angry, there's a seething feeling through our body, right? Like your, hands and legs tend to get, into a fist, and we get more contracted in our muscles. So try feeling that. Now, there's another very important question here. Which emotion is easiest to identify and which is the hardest? So this will also give you a clue to what emotions are you more receptive to, more aware of, and what emotions do you have more of, repression or resistance towards. And I'll tell you something very interesting. This mind-body relationship is not something that we are very aware of, but for a lot of people, you will see that in your body, the emotion that you feel the most is pain. And then that is a sign that you have to work on your emotions. Okay. So this is something that you can identify, that which emotion is easiest to identify and which is the hardest. So when I was also going through this journey of understanding this mind body connection better for myself, or understanding how the mind affects the body, especially emotions, I started to figure out that the emotion that I feel the most in my body, listen to my body only when it is in pain. So that's the only feeling or emotion that I respond to. But I'm not really aware of what really happens in my body when I experience some other emotion. So this was just some amount of self-disclosure as an example, just to motivate you or encourage you that you can share about yourself as well. So this is the first activity. You can do it on your own whenever possible. Now, the second one is known as the emotion diary. So this is a lot like something which can help you understand your emotions better. So whatever, choose two current or recent emotional reactions you had. So anything that has happened recently. So let's say if I have to pick out something, I would pick out the feeling of frustration or helplessness that I felt when I saw that there are certain neighbors or certain people around who are probably cracking, those sound crackers, which are very, very loud and disturbing the animals and the elderly people in the surroundings. So this is beyond my control, right? So there was a feeling of frustration and helplessness. So just like that, this is just an example to help you understand. Choose any two current or recent emotional reactions you had. For instance, I was feeling nervous before this workshop. So this is a typical emotion I feel, before any workshop. So that's again very common, no matter how many workshops I do. So these choose two current or recent emotional reactions you had and fill out as much of the worksheet that you can see below. So what you can do is you can put the day that, okay, today is a Saturday. This is the event which happened. What is the emotion function? What are you trying to communicate? So let's say this is how you reacted, but does it help? How does it serve you? What do you actually need? You need probably some sort of emotional support. You probably need to be validated. Again, quick clarification here, because validation is the pop term now that we are all used to using. Validation does not mean that someone else is going to accept whatever you are saying. It does not mean that someone is going to be your yes person, that okay, whatever you say, that duty is that yeah, you are right, yeah, I totally agree with you. That's not validation. Validation is when you feel you are heard. So the message which is being communicated is, I hear you, I understand you, I hear you. So when you are communicating, let's say something with a lot of anger, with a lot of frustration, or probably you're displacing your frustration from somewhere else on someone else, does it serve you? Does it help you to communicate what you actually want to communicate? And what do you exactly need? So this is something that will be easy for you to figure out, that what was I exactly feeling? What did I exactly need? And how much of a disparity there was between what I needed and what I communicated. So this is something that will give you a clarity about this disparity that you might have in your communication and in your need. So this is something that you can do on a daily basis. The third is mindfulness of my emotions. So as I mentioned, when it comes to emotional regulation, mindfulness is very deeply related to emotional regulation, because it really helps us in grounding ourselves, in understanding our emotions, in modifying our emotions as much as possible. So this is something that again you can do. You can name your emotions. So that's the first task, naming your emotions and putting it on in terms of intensity on a scale of 0 to 100. Where are you feeling it? Let's say I'm feeling nervous. In the intensity table of 0 to 100, where do I feel it? Maybe somewhere around 50, 55. So that's the first thing. Another thing which is very, very important, especially when it comes to emotional regulation, is identifying your triggers. So again, this is a very commonly used term. We use it very often. We tell each other very often that you triggered me, that situation triggered me, that word triggers me. So it's very important to identify what triggers you. It's not that that trigger is not going to surface in your life anymore, because again, it's beyond your control a lot of times, but you will know how to navigate around that. So prompting event or trigger for my emotion. Who is my trigger? What is my trigger? When do I get triggered? Let's say when you are hungry, you get triggered more. When you are already frustrated, you get triggered more. And where? That what are the sort of surroundings in which you have a tendency of getting triggered easily? The second important aspect is thoughts or interpretations or beliefs or assumptions about the trigger. So let's say I get triggered in these sort of social situations. because I believe that these people are not really fond of me. They are very pretentious. So again, it's coming from some sort of assumption or belief I have about the trigger that again you can work on. And the third thing that we saw in activity 1 as well, body sensations. Where in my body do I feel that emotion? What was my body language, facial expression, or posture? Like for instance, this is something that we all psychologists are presumably good at, right? Like this is something that we'll, hear so often that amake dekhe ki mone hocche. What do you think seeing me? And we also learn these sort of things like understanding non-verbal language or body language is also a part of our craft. But this is also very important to know what is going on in your body, because a lot of times you may not figure out the emotions, but you might be able to figure out your emotions based on your body sensation. That let's say my lips start to quiver or my lips start to tremble when I'm really emotional, when I'm really feeling emotional, overwhelmed, I want to cry, but I cannot. But I don't get to figure out that, but I understand I'm getting emotional when I feel that body sensation. So sometimes your body even gives you cues about your emotions. Action, what did I do? What did I say? So, how did I respond to that trigger? How did I act based on the emotions that I was feeling? How did the emotion affect me afterwards? Were there secondary emotions? What did I do after the event or trigger? So another important thing by which you can distinguish between someone who is emotionally probably a bit dysregulated and someone who isn't is the fact that someone who goes through emotion dysregulation needs a lot of time to come back to a state of stability. So let's say if something has happened, someone who is emotionally dysregulated will actually need a lot of time to come back to a baseline level of emotion, to come to a stable state. So that is also something that we have to probably monitor in ourselves, that okay, today I had a quarrel with this friend of mine, or I had an argument with my partner or husband. How long did it take me to calm myself down? How long did it take me to not get affected by this so much to respond or probably overreact to another situation? Okay, now this is a question bank. So this is something that you can try with yourself whenever you feel that, okay, I'm still not out of those emotions. The event has passed, the event is gone, but I'm still in that state and I want to calm myself down. I want to feel better. These are certain questions that you can ask yourself. Maybe you can write down for yourself also after this workshop. My favorite movie of all time is, my favorite song of all time. So these are things which can help you ground in the moment. So these would be your places of safety. Places of safety are not always physical spaces, right? So you could find safety in this feel good movie that you have watched all your life. You could find safety in a favorite song that you return to every now and then. My greatest accomplishment, my perfect day. So that, what do I imagine when I think of a perfect day? How do I make this day a bit more, towards perfection today? That, okay, like again, perfection is an utopian concept, but the kind of ideal day, good day that I have in mind. My most cherished possession is that, what do I cherish the most? Is that unharmed? Is that unhindered? My favorite cheer me up music. That, okay, whenever I listen to this music, I feel happier. This has some sort of very strong positive association for me. I enjoy reading. So what do you enjoy reading? So it could be a piece of poetry. It could be something that really, brings you up when you are really feeling down. For instance, I really like the poem Invictus. Whenever I go through the poem Invictus, it really brings me up. So whatever it is, my fantasy vacation. So probably doing nothing and just imagining that what will the fantasy vacation be like? Will it be a sea beach? Will it be a mountain? Is it going to be a sunrise? Is it going to be a sunset? How is it going to be? Is it going to be cold? Is it going to be warm? Just imagining that, or maybe even making a travel itinerary that, okay, in 6 months, I want to have this vacation and I want to plan it beforehand. I don't do it much, but I enjoy. So there are also a lot of things that we probably enjoy but don't do as much. If I could lighten up a little, I would let myself, If I weren't so stingy with myself, I would buy myself. Two people I admire are, so sometimes having these sort of ideal figures, or ideal figures in the sense inspirations, people you look up to, that could also help you get out of your tough times. I'm proud of myself for, I'm grateful for. So all of these questions may not be applicable for you and across different situations, but these are certain things that you can keep in mind, probably for these moments in which you feel that you are emotionally in a low state or in an overwhelmed state, even after that event has passed, and you want to boost yourself up. These are certain things which can work. Another very interesting thing, so maybe you can do this today after the workshop, make a self-soothing kit. So to make this kit, the first thing that you have got to do is pick up a box. Pick up any box or any container that you find quirky, cute, you find very beautiful, whatever. So pick up a container firstly. It could be something really small. It doesn't have to be really big. And in that kit, put certain things that you find self-soothing. So you have to just keep it in mind that these things have to be appealing to your five senses. Okay, so it could be, let's say, some small soap, or maybe an essential oil bottle, or maybe a scented candle that you find really soothing. The smell of it is really soothing, it really grounds you. Keep it in that. Maybe there's some sort of a visual image, maybe a statue, maybe a sculpture, maybe a small piece of memento that someone had given you, and you really carry it with you everywhere. You find it very grounding, you find it very positive. Keep it in that because it's appealing to your visual senses. Anything with, the sound of which really calms you down. So it could be something very simple, maybe some one of those small chanting wheels that you find, maybe one of those small trinklets that you find, anything which could be appealing to your auditory senses. So you can put five of these things. Let's say a pebble, a very love pebble which has a very cold and smooth surface, and touching that makes you feel really calm and soothing. Or maybe a part of a small, those ping pong balls which are very soft, cottony, cuddly, maybe putting one of those balls there. So whatever appeals to you, you have to find out that. But having this with you is going to be like, okay, I have something with me which can help me calm myself down in a minute. Maybe I can only sit in a place, expose myself to all these things that I find soothing, and ground myself down in a minute. So maybe you can do it today itself. Just carrying it around is going to give you a feeling of positivity, that I have something with me which I know will make me feel better. So that could also help to a lot of extent. Okay. Now we have been through the, some of the activities of emotional regulation. In addition to that, we will also discuss about resilience. But before we do that, there's another disclaimer here, that resilience is also very, very interrelated with some of the other positive psychological capital, like things that we consider as positive psychological attributes. For example, self-efficacy, hope, optimism, resilience, all of these are very interrelated. So earlier, resilience would be thought of somewhat like the concept of elasticity in physics, that it's something that can bring you back to your original position or to your original state very easily. So if a person is resilient, then let's say if something negative has happened, something really overwhelming has happened, it will be really easy and spontaneous for you to return back to your original state, or your state of stability, or your state of well-being. But gradually, we have started to realize that it's not bouncing back to your original state, because whatever you face in life, that makes you better, that enhances your ability. So you are not really returning back to your original position. You are returning back to the newer state of well-being, or the newer state of stability that you have found through growth. The reason why resilience nowadays, though it's a controversial topic still, but resilience nowadays is also referred to as post-traumatic growth or stealing effect. That if a person has been through any sort of trauma, the person will rise to be a more resilient person. and that is precisely post-traumatic growth. So that's a quick clarification that resilience is also not a trait. It's not that people are born resilient. We become resilient when we deal with more of trauma, stressors. We become more and more resilient. So it's a process of becoming rather than a trait in itself. So that is why the discussion on resilience, we will start with some myths. So there are certain myths that I would like to bust here, and these myths are not only related to the concept of resilience, but also the concept of happiness that we know, you know. So the first thing that you have got to understand is that resilience is a process, not a trait. So people are not born highly resilient or really poorly resilient. Of course, there are contributing factors, but it's a process, it's an ongoing process that goes on all your life. The second thing is resilience is very deeply related to the other things that we mentioned, the other attributes, as we have already discussed. Another very weird, conception that we have, and we actually tend to rationalize it a lot also, is that knowing makes you win half the battle. So the fact that we have workshops more and less of webinars and seminars is also because of this reason that knowing does not really make you change your behavior. So let's say you have been told today by the doctor that, okay, you have diabetes, and for this you have to make this and these changes to your lifestyle. Just knowing it, does it help you to change your behavior? No. It could act as a primary source of motivation, maybe for some time that too, but it doesn't really lead to any long lasting impact. So that is something that we have got to figure out. The reason why we are going into more interaction based, experiential based approach is also because that knowing really doesn't bring about any change. You have to act to bring about change. So this is one myth that we have to bust. Another thing is what we think makes us happy does not actually make us happy. So I'll explain this to you. Like we often feel that, okay, like let's say I'll order a pizza today. I'm going to have the pizza and I'm going to feel happy. Or let's say I'm going to buy this dress that I'm really thinking of buying, and it will fit me perfectly just the way I've imagined, and I will be happy. But it's not there that happiness lies. There was this very interesting study which had shown that no matter how much materialistic wealth or the sort of things that you want for yourself you attain, that happiness at the most lasts for a few hours to a few days, not any more than that. So another thing that we have got to figure out is the distinction between materialistic happiness and experiential happiness. So if you really have to go, in your emotional regulation, you want to grow your emotional regulation, resilience, optimism, no matter what, you have to learn how to experience good things. So experiencing things brings about far long lasting happiness, sustainable happiness than materialistic happiness. Now coming to the determinants of resilience, like what are the things which help us to work on resilience? Of course, some of it is genetic. We can't really deny that a bit of resilience comes from your family also. How resilient were your family members? A bit of it is also a part of observational learning. How have you seen your parents cope with crisis situations? How have you seen them cope with difficult situations? So you have learned how to cope seeing your parents or seeing your family. So that affects you to a lot of extent. Also community resilience. So for instance, we know of certain ethnicities or certain cultural backgrounds who are famous for being resilient, right? That they bounce back very easily. For example, Germans are famous for being resilient because of how they bounced back after the whole Nazi movement, that now they are one of the greatest nations, in spite of the fact that they started to work on themselves so late after the Nazi revolution and the kind of impact it had. Exposure to stressors. So of course, the reason why the kind of resilience building skills that we will discuss today is also very deeply related to happiness, optimism, is also because you can't expose people to stressors, right? So a huge part of resilience is also exposure. That the more exposed you are to stressors, the more you have a habit and practice of dealing with stressful situations, the more your resilience is going to grow. So you cannot ensure or put people in places of which they are going to consider as stressors, but the key is not avoiding it, exposing yourself to stressful situations, dealing with it, knowing how to cope with it. And it's also important for parents to understand this because, in case of a lot of parenting styles, for example, over involved parenting, we see that parents don't allow their children to deal with stressors. They have this sort of a point of view that, let's not expose him to anything or her to anything. Let him or her be by himself. Let him or her only concentrate on his or her studies or activities, whatever, but not let him know about whatever is going wrong around him. That really doesn't help the person. In fact, the person is then brought up with very unrealistic idea about the world or how the world operates. So that's another thing, that exposure to stressors is important for building resilience, presence of adaptive coping skills. And this is not a cause and effect relationship, like this is a vice versa relationship. If you have adaptive coping skills, you will be more resilient. If you are more resilient, you will have more adaptive coping skills. So a sense of purpose in life is also very important, because when you have a sense of purpose in life, you know where you are headed, so you are less disappointed, you are less brought down, bogged down by the negative experiences in your life. Another thing is internal locus of control. So people who are from psychology background might understand this term. Basically, it means whether you believe that whether your life is within your control or not. And it also depends on your narrative about things. So you must have wondered why there has been a change in the terminology of these things. Like, we don't call acid attack victims anymore. We don't call rape victims anymore. One reason for not calling them victims and calling them survivors is precisely this. How we perceive ourselves also depends on the kind of narrative that we have about ourselves, right? So when you consider yourself as a survivor, you believe that there are a lot of aspects of your life which are within your control. You operate your life, you have a sense of agency over your life, and that is extremely important. And only when you have an internal locus of control does it lead to self-directedness. Then hopefulness, optimism, all of this is of course related to resilience. Also creating a resilient work and educational environment. So it's also important for us to have an environment which is resilient. So if we have an environment which is resilient, we won't be scared of failing. We won't be scared of losing. We will know that, okay, like we fail, we lose, and still we go ahead. That is how life is going to be. So all of these are very important determinants of resilience. Now we will start to commit to working on it. So this is something that we can take up as a challenge. So I have kept it in a way that you can incorporate these habits. You can keep it as a sort of weekly challenge that, okay, every week I have something new to work on, and you have to continue with it. If you continue with it, you will see gradual change in yourself. So this is the rewirement challenge. So we are trying to rewire our brain. So you can catch hold of your pen, pencil, paper, whatever you have, and jot these down for yourself. So the first one is measure your happiness. So today, after let's say today's workshop, or maybe while we are at it, you can do this. So you can see there's an acronym here, PERMA. So positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, accomplishment, health, negative emotions, loneliness, and overall well-being. So you can rate yourself. As you can see, there's a rating from 0 to 10. So let's say you can rate positive emotions. How much of positive emotions do you feel in a day? Let's rate it on a scale of 0 to 10. How much do you engage in social communication with others? How much do you interact with other people? How much do you talk with other people? How involved are you in your interpersonal relationships? So this is how you're going to score it. Relationships, how is the quality of your relationships? Does it help you in your self-growth? Does it help you in your self-improvement? Is it mutually encouraging, mutually motivating? Let's put a score on it. So this is something that you start with. So just like any intervention, any self-improvement skill, we start with a baseline assessment, right? So you can use this as a baseline assessment, that these are certain pointers that you have. Apart from that, you can rate yourself on a scale of authentic happiness. So how happy do I exactly feel authentically? And the happiness scale in general, that okay, I don't have to figure out whether it's authentic or not, but how happy do I feel in general. So these is a baseline that you can start with. So this is step one. So this is what you are going to start with in week one. Step two, learn to savor. So as we discussed, anything like, if you experience it, if the experience is rich, you will feel good about it. So if you notice, we have stopped savoring things, to a lot of extent. So whenever you are eating, you are watching a show. Whenever, let's say, you have gone for a coffee to a cafe, you are busy chatting with your friend. Whenever you're watching a movie, your attention is diverted in 5 different directions. Did the popcorn arrive? Is my friend giving attention to the movie? Are we enjoying exactly the same scenes while the movie is going on? So we are not really in the present moment. So savoring, just like how you savor a new taste of a food that you are tasting for the first time. So savoring is the act of stepping outside of an experience to review and appreciate it. So savoring intensifies and lengthens the positive emotion that comes with doing something you love. So how do you learn how to savor things in your everyday practice? Firstly, pick up certain activities, maybe taking a bath. That I savored the process of taking a bath, or I savored the process of having my dinner, or I savored the process of watching this favorite movie of mine. When you do that, what you do is first share that experience with another person. So let's say I had gone for this trip and I wanted to savor the sunset that I saw. So I shared the experience of that beautiful sunset with another person. Secondly, think about how lucky you are to enjoy such an amazing moment. That I feel so lucky that I was able to see a sunset. There was no sound all around, there was no noise, and I was able to enjoy that sunset in the moment. So feel lucky or fortunate that you were able to experience this amazing moment. Keep a souvenir or photo of that activity. So we are all very Insta friendly these days, right? So another thing which can probably motivate you, and probably it can help you keep a memory of that moment that you have savored also, is to keep a souvenir or a photo of that activity. That okay, let's just take a picture of that moment or that activity for later, and make sure you stay in the present moment the entire time. So when you are in that moment, you are not thinking whether you are going to get likes when you post this picture, whether you are at all going to post this picture over Insta or not. The purpose here is to make sure that you are in the present moment the entire time, savoring the experience as much as possible. Now coming to the activity number 3 or week 3, start with the gratitude journal. So this is not something that you really have to spend a lot of time in. I know this is something that everyone talks about, and the more everyone talks about, some of us get more and more resistant. I don't know whether it happens to you, but this of course happens to me, that when everyone suggests you to do something, you feel more and more resistant towards it. That, like everyone is doing it. What's so special about it? But research actually shows that taking time to experience gratitude can make you happier, and not only happier, also healthier. So maybe for the next 7 days, you can just take out 5 or 10 minutes time and write down 5 things for which you are grateful. So let's say I'm grateful that I have food on my plate. Let's say I'm grateful that I have a comfortable setup where I don't feel cold during the winters, and I don't like winters at all. So okay, that's one something I'm grateful of. I'm not speaking of myself. I like winter very much, but these are certain 5 things that you can write every day, and you can keep adding to it. The fourth is random acts of kindness. Now, this seems like something which is straight out of those manifestation and laws of attraction sort of books, right? But this actually works. when you engage in random acts of kindness, not only are you bringing up your level of happiness, your level of optimism, or you also know that you are helping someone else in a positive manner. And these feelings actually go a long way. So the next 7 days, try to perform 7 acts of kindness beyond what you normally do. So 7 acts of kindness because there are obviously 7 days in a week. So nothing really out of the world. That okay, maybe you helped a blind person cross the road. Maybe you helped someone who didn't have change with some money you had and just exchange it. It's not that you're giving alms, just helping the person make the day smoother. Or maybe when someone asked for a direction on the road, you gave the direction, you guided the person through. These small acts of kindness, none of it is out of the way. And make sure that you practice these with people with whom you do not have a reciprocal relationship. So you know that you are doing it just out of kindness. You are not doing it out of the expectation that, okay, if I help this person in this situation, this person is going to help me later. So it has to be with a random stranger, with someone you are going through the road. So random acts of kindness. That's week 4. Week 5, make social communication. So there are a lot of researches and logical reasons why we all know that socialization, having interpersonal ties, good interpersonal relationships, is a protective factor from all sorts of mental health conditions, all sorts of stress-induced conditions, trauma-induced conditions. The more you socialize, the more you have social connections with people, the more you feel better about your mood. So that is something also that you can do. You don't have to get into deeper connections. Let's say the Uber driver or the cab driver who is driving you to the workplace. Just have a warm exchange with that person. Let's say the Swiggy delivery guy who has come home to deliver your dinner. Just exchange a few positive sentences with that person. Let's say you are traveling in a public transport with someone else sitting beside you. Have a social exchange with that person. Have a social smile. These small things can not only make someone else's life better, but yours also. Step 6, another thing that we all are tired of hearing, but of course it is very important, and that is the reason why we keep hearing it every now and then. That is exercise. So 30 minutes of exercise, of course, doing this exercise is not with the intent of helping you be physically or physically in a state of fitness. It's not about that. It's more about having a mind and body which is healthier, in the sense that this helps you in secreting the hormones and neurotransmitters that helps with the feeling of positivity. So having exercise every day, make it a part of your life. It could just be walking, because the intent here is not to lose weight, not to sculpt your body, not to be physically fit, but to help you in your holistic well-being. So you can just start with a 15 minutes brisk walk every day and just keep at it. Just make sure that you're doing it every day. That's it. Step 7, another very important component. I feel like a hypocrite when I talk about this, but that is sleep. So in week 7, work on your sleep. It might feel that this should be completely unrelated to how does it help in resilience, but it does, because if you're not well rested, your mind and body will not be at its optimum level of functioning. If it is not at its optimal level of functioning and you feel fatigued, if you feel tired, you will be far more irritable, agitated, frustrated, even when you face any minor negative experiences in your life. So that's another very important thing. And most of us are sleep deprived. There's this alarming research which shows that 1 in 2 individuals all over India are sleep deprived. So this is something that we really need to work on. So maybe if you're sleeping 5 hours a day, bring it up by an hour, keep it to 6 hours, maintain it for a week. The next week, try 7 hours, at least keep 7 hours per day. So this is something that we really have to work on. And also I would like to add something here, that being a night owl, being sleep deprived, not sleeping a lot, has also become an in thing, very interestingly. So because people bring up examples of people who do not sleep a lot. So you will see people bringing up random examples of Steve Jobs and other people who are very famous, the billionaires who sleep 4 hours a day. Instantly, also Shah Rukh Khan. That, people will bring up these examples that this person, sleeps 4 hours a day and still functions. This person sleeps 4 hours a day and hence saves time and can work on whatever he or she wants. And probably that's why the person is successful. But it's not true. So this is something that we have got to understand, that this is important for normal or healthy functioning. And success is not equal to well-being, or success is not equal to sustainable happiness. So this is another thing that we really have to work on, which is sleep. Now, step 8 is meditation. Now, meditation does not have to be the kind of typical meditation that we see. It could be mindfulness, breathing exercise. It could be practicing self-compassion. There are also so many apps available these days which help us in meditating. For example, there's a Headspace, there's Calm. There are a lot of these apps which help you also. I've also heard that there's this app called Black Lotus, if I'm not wrong. And that also has these meditation exercises which are very gamified as well. So I have been told by a lot of young clients of mine that they like these sort of meditations also because it's not boring. Because another very important problem these days is we do not have a lot of attention span. So if someone tells you to sit in one place and concentrate on one thing for 5 minutes, it would rather feel like a torture rather than being a calming feeling, right? So whatever works for you, but meditation is something that really helps in grounding ourselves, in being positive, being resilient. The last but not the least, writing a gratitude letter or making a gratitude visit. So whichever person that you are thankful for, and maybe you have never probably thanked this person, you can just write a gratitude letter to this person. It could also be to someone who is not alive anymore. Maybe it is to a grandparent, maybe it is to a parent that you have lost recently, maybe it is to a friend that you are not in touch with anymore. But just sit down and write this letter of gratitude to someone you care about. It could be a living person or it may not be a living person, but take out half an hour to write this. And make sure that it's at least for 300 words. So that's the standard. You can write any longer than that, but at least 300 words. Because it feels like I'm putting out some sort of positivity. I'm letting the other person know how they have impacted my life positively. And that also helps you to count your blessings. So it might seem very unrelated to these positive psychological attributes that we are talking about, but optimism, happiness, resilience, all of these are very deeply related to one another. Now, step 10. So this is week 10. So this will be about 2.5 months from now, probably. So just sit down and measure your level of happiness again. So go back to activity 1 and measure your level of happiness. So this will work only when you have worked on the other activities, the weekly activities that we discussed in between. If you have really worked on that, you probably will see that there is a difference in your measure of happiness. So we all know that it takes about 28 days to rewire a new habit in our brain. So doing these weekly activities can really help. So go through the previous steps again and keep going with it and measure your level of happiness again. So maybe you will find a better way of living and you might see the change in yourself. So that's all for today. Some resources to go. First, one day at a time. Do not take the load that you really have to change yourself. Maybe you're doing just fine the way you are. You may not have to change a lot. So just take one day at a time. Work on the things that you want to work on, like the basics. Maybe I want to work on my sleep. Maybe I want to sever my meals. If I sever my meals, probably I won't be overeating. So, small things like this, one day at a time. Keep grounding exercises as a part of your life. It helps with everything. Like it helps with emotional regulation. It helps with other things as well. Another third thing which can really help you soothe your body in a moment, we can all do that now while as we speak, maybe make a butterfly with your hand and hug yourself. Just do this. It does nothing, just putting these warm taps on your body, it just calms you down. So whenever you're overwhelmed, whenever you're feeling really, out of your window of tolerance and you want to calm yourself down, you don't have another person to hug yourself, but you have some moment with yourself, this is something that you can do. Just calm yourself like this. Another thing, it's an imaginary balm. It's the magic balm. So whenever you feel out of, your area of comfort, whenever you feel really anxious, really overwhelmed, just rub your hands together like this. Produce some magic balm. This balm includes warmth, it includes positivity, and just wrap it around your body as much as possible. So that's another thing that you can do. And safe place visualization is another favorite of mine. So this is just, you need to do nothing but just to sit in one place and imagine your safe place as vividly as possible. So let's see, it could be the balcony of your home, it could be your room, it could be your bed, it could be a sea beach, but wherever it is, try imagining it as vividly as possible, as if you can hear the noises and sounds there. You can feel what's beneath your feet. You can feel where you're sitting. Try imagining it as vividly as possible. So as I mentioned right at the beginning of the workshop, that these are things that we need to incorporate. It's important to act on it, experience it, no matter how much we talk and discuss about it. It probably would make no difference if you don't decide one day to work on it bit by bit. You don't have to work on it all at once, but work on it bit by bit. Okay, so thank you. I think we already have some questions lined up.
Right, Anushadevi, we'll begin with it. Just while I was listening to you, we started this series with unhappiness, like what makes us really unhappy. The second talk was on empathy. The third talk was on the mental health of the margins. And today you spoke about emotional resilience, well-being, building, and managing the regulation part. And the next day we have a session on complex PTSD. That is by Ms. Mansi Poddar ma'am, who is also quite experienced and popular in our field. So it was amazing to see it all circling up, somewhere or the other. So thank you for putting it out so nicely. And I think the pointers that we got here, that is going to be really helpful for us to keep a check onto everything. So this is just a reminder for the participants as well that we have another session coming up on 25th. And now we'll head down to the questions, ma'am. So, ma'am, there is a question which is very interesting. That is good mental health related to good food?
Yeah, it is somewhat. But again, here, the concept of good food is relative, right? So if good food is what tastes nice to you, then that is not what good food is about. Good food is what makes you feel good in your gut, in your tummy. So you really have to understand your body. So for instance, when you have curd, it does not really feel good in your mouth. No, it's okay, it's fine, but it really gives a calming sensation and it leads to, it induces the secretion of serotonin. And that is a protective factor from depression. So that's the thing that, good food is the definition that we really have to concentrate on, that what do we mean by good food? It's not essentially tasty food, spicy food, but nutritious food, food that feels good in your body, that of course is related to mental health.
Right, thank you. There is another question, ma'am, that is, what are the factors which actually drains out on our emotional well-being? If you could also talk about that a bit.
Drains out?
Drains out, detrimental for our mental health.
Okay. So I think a lot of that would depend on the context or environment also. Like be aware of the kind of people you're surrounded by. So if you are surrounded by very pessimistic, cynical people, demotivating people, people who do not help in mutual growth, collective growth, then that is something that you have got to figure out. You have to stay away from these sort of, company, because we all know that all of us have a different level of empathy, and we absorb the kind of energy or the kind of collective vibe around us very easily. So you firstly have to figure out the kind of surrounding you have. Secondly, seeing situations and environments in the moment. A lot of time what happens is we get hugely triggered by an event because it has similarity with n number of events from the past, and that is what makes it overwhelming. So it's very important to work on your past trauma, work on your past pain, so that you can see situations as it is. You do not see them as piled up events that, okay, this keeps happening to me, this is something that happens to me so many times. So then you tend to react rather than respond. So that is why it's also important to already address the issues that you have underlying.
Right, right. Linked to this, we have a kind of another question. Somebody has asked that there's this, we have two sorts of emotions we know. We have positive emotions and negative emotions. And she has two questions. One is, first is like, do we need to control both? Do we need to regulate both? And if yes, how can we do that? Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Firstly, I have certain reservations towards, using these watertight categories of positive and negative, because I think a lot of emotions lie in the fringe. Like anger is something which can be used positively as well. Anxiety, to start with, is not negative. If you do not experience anxiety at all, you wouldn't work on anything. You will be extremely casual and laid back about anything and everything, and that's not helpful, right? So the first thing is, stop labeling emotions as positive or negative. So that's the first thing that we have got to do, because when we label our emotions, we tend to judge them, and the less accepting we are of our own emotions. So that's the first step that you have got to figure out if you have to work on your emotions, no matter which category of emotions they lie in. And of course, like anything which it's too much, like the concept is of being overwhelmed. So you could be overwhelmed by a huge feeling of happiness also, and then come crashing down, right? So anything which you do not experience in moderation and you fly off the handle very easily, that can of course impact your state of well-being. And that is what emotional regulation is about. That no matter what you feel in the moment, you experience it, but you are not controlled by it. So that is something that we have got to figure out through emotional regulation.
Very important. Anusha ma'am, actually, some people want to see your face, but we can see your PPT right now. Is it okay if you should close it? So that
Sure,
I
sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm stopping screen sharing, right?
Sure, ma'am. Sure.
Okay.
Now
Yeah,
we can see you.
yeah.
Ma'am, we have another question associated with this concept of, how the concept of well-being and regulation shifts from culture to culture. And there is one question that we have that I would like to understand how a person attains optimum emotional regulation, considering the fluidity of the term and culture-specific labels. So I think we would like to understand how it is different in various cultures
Yeah,
and.
yeah, yeah. Of course, of course. Like, for instance, in a culture like India, a lot of the emotional expression that we engage in would seem very over the top and or very
Mm,
magnified in the German culture. Or
mm,
for, let's say, someone who's Italian or Spanish, their expression could just seem very over the top in a different culture. So that is there. So it's very important to understand your emotions in your own sociocultural context that is there. And another aspect is the kind of impact it is having on you. I think, it will be easy to figure out how much of it has got to do with the culture and how much of it isn't, if you figure out the kind of impact it has on different aspects of your life. How does it impact your interpersonal relationship? How does it impact your occupational life, your social life, your self hygiene, your self care on a day to day basis? That will, make you figure out whether this is an optimal state of self regulation or not. Because as you mentioned, a lot of it depends on the context, which is true. That's the reason why we have got to figure out. Also, another important point here is when we talk about psychology or these sorts of evaluation, it's very subjective, isn't it? So, if we are talking about a person who is very self-critical, that person would hardly ever feel that I am in a state of optimal emotional regulation, isn't it? So it's also important to have a neutral, objective yardstick to measure my state of emotional regulation, because I may not have a very objective perspective towards that.
Right. And like I was thinking of situations like what are culturally approved and what are not. So I could actually think of, Amati Charpashe, when we go to meet somebody, they expect us to say that we are doing well. And
Yes.
we really do not have a space where we can say that I'm struggling in these areas of my life, because often those are seen as lack of emotional regulation. But as far as I have understood, some other, maybe something more native, something more culturally exclusive, ethnic rather. I have seen that they even have, this thing called Ubuntu. I guess I have heard of that. It's basically a culture where they come and grieve together, mourn together, and talk about their losses. So in that space, it is not considered an dysregulation per se. So I
Yes.
think the first thing that you said, that our circle and the people we are with, their empathy and everything would come into matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very
Priyanka,
important.
uh, that question was mine that you just asked. So I would like to. I have a further question on Nisha.
Sure.
As you say, that it's culture specific, and we all know that it's very different from culture to culture. But within a culture, there are at times with few personalities, there are very remarkable difference in the emotional, in the perception of emotional balance, even within a culture. And uh, when you say that when we are in the middle of a emotion, middle of a fire, we might not be that objective in understanding the balance. But at the same time, I'm very curious to know that when you are in the middle of a fire, and when you are in the middle of a fire by choice, and when you are in the middle of a fire for most of your life, you kind of develop a new kind of balance, and and a new kind of and a new way of life. And we tend to be judged by the normative standards all the time that this is an imbalance. So the fluidity, that was my question, the fluidity of emotional regulation can be very different even within a culture.
Yes.
Would you like to add something to it?
True, true. The thing that you're saying, that's so related with so many phenomena that we know. For example, I'll give you an instance. Like, this is about a client of mine. So this client of mine lost her parent a few months ago, and she was abandoned by her mother a year ago, and they are not in touch with, their mother, like her mother anymore. And when her father lost, she was judged by her peers and her family members that she's not crying. She's not crying, so she's not grieving. She's not at all sad that her father has left. But the reality is that she was then grappling with a lot of other things, that how do I sustain my studies in this situation? Do we have enough savings to go on with my studies for the next few years? How do I sustain that? So she had so many practical aspects to take care of, that socially acceptable reaction of grieving was not something that she could really, come up with as per the expectation of society. So that is, of course, an important part. There are so many things related to it. For example, the sort of caregiver burden that healthcare workers have, that after a point of time we become immune to a lot of reactions, and our reactions may not feel as empathetic by the other people. So that's one aspect to it, of course, like that's very much there, that we tend to judge people so much based on our standards or yardsticks of what is the expected emotional reaction or response in a particular situation. And also, there's also an important part of what you mentioned, which probably will be discussed by the next speaker. This is what actually leads to a state like CPTSD, that when someone is in a fire by choice and is in that fire by choice for a prolonged period of time, how that really impacts the person's nervous system, the person's emotional faculties, that is something which can actually lead to trauma-induced conditions like CPTSD. So
Right.
probably that's something that you guys will already discuss in another.
Yes, and it can be very different. What I mean to say is, I think that is also a takeaway from our session today, that we tend to judge people too easily, right? When somebody is not crying at her father's funeral, we tend to judge the person as insensitive.
Right.
So I think the takeaway would be that it's also very important for us to be respectful before judging somebody's emotion.
True.
Thank you so much, Anusha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. We have another question here. She is a female. She's writing that she feels more on the masculine side of the emotional experiences. So she feels masculine energy, anger, disgust, frustration, and a strange sense of void. And she's trying to understand how to deal with it. So if you could interpret this.
Yeah. Firstly, whoever this person is, don't label your emotions as masculine and feminine, because these are all gender stereotypes. This again shows how we don't allow certain people to feel certain emotions, isn't it? That anger is something that a man can feel. That's a masculine emotion. Anger is not a feminine emotion, so that is not acceptable in a female. So the question also brings up how the person has so much of shame and judgment associated with feeling these emotions in the first place. So that's one. Secondly, when it comes to anger, we usually treat anger as a secondary emotion. So if you are angry, that means probably there is some other emotion lying underneath that you have not processed. So maybe if you can work on your emotional awareness, where is this feeling of void coming from? Where is this anger coming from? What lies underneath? Maybe it will help you to process your emotions better and also regulate your emotions in the process.
And while you were answering this, something just came to my mind that, as a Gen Z millennial, we have more access to internet nowadays. So we kind of have more access to information. And mental health services have been a little bit more accessible to more of people. But what happens, like I have seen a lot of people talking about it, that even if we know, like we have the information that this is what is happening, but there's this huge gap on the action part of it. So is it somehow linked with the emotional regulation part that we're talking about, or is there a way we can address it?
Yeah, so yeah, you are right. There is a lot of emotion available out there. It's also the reason why people diagnose themselves so easily these days. They figure out what the problem is very easily. So they know, they come with a diagnosis. Now they want a solution. So the first thing is, I think, that's what I mentioned, that when it comes to emotional regulation skills, it's very experiential. You have to go through the processes to feel the change. So whether you are going for body-based therapy techniques like listening to your body, deep breathing, figuring out where you feel those sensations in your body, you have to do that to feel the difference. So not everyone is ready to go through that. So, there is a level of resistance that we have towards trying anything new, so that is of course there. So there is a lot of information available. You will also find easily available these sort of workbooks also. There are these freely available workbooks on emotional regulation also. It's just that we have to figure out what works for us and we have to give it a try and see the difference that it makes.
And I think also it's also this awareness. It would take some time. I mean, since our overall experiences have taken time to formulate, it will take time to alter it. And the moment you talked about mindfulness, I could also relate to that. That maybe we are working towards it. Maybe we are bringing changes. but we are not mindful about what the baseline was and where we are right now. And we also have a practice of looking at progress like this, like upward curve. So I think emotional regulation is a space where it's a very wave,
Wandering
and
way.
it's not a very pretty wave all the time.
Hmm.
So yeah, just putting it out there. There's another question. The question is that is it possible to maintain emotional resilience all the time? And I would like to add another bit of it. Is it required to maintain emotional resilience all the time? If you could please address.
The answer to both is no. So yeah, like it's not necessary for you to maintain emotional resilience all the time, like because that has its loopholes as well. Like, how do you feel around a person who does not respond to anything? Is that normal even? No, it's the solution is not to be unaffected by anything. That okay, I'm not affected by anything. Nothing touches me. Nothing affects me. Then it doesn't make you a human. It makes you a machine. And we want human beings. Like in this time and age of AI, we have enough of machines. We want human beings at the end of the day. So of course, you don't need to be emotionally resilient all the time. And as I mentioned, you cannot be as well. Like this is a process. We are all going through the ebbs and flows of life, emerging to be more and more resilient with every experience. Like that's the thing, that okay, today probably I'm slightly less resilient than how I'm going to be in another 6 months. So it's a process that you are going through. And as you mentioned, it's in ebbs and flows. It's not, a steady flow all the time. And that is what makes us human, isn't it? So that's there. And it's not required also. Yeah.
At times this feels that if we could actually be this kind and this forgiving with ourselves, life would have been actually very easy.
Yeah,
And
that's the
since
toughest. That's the toughest.
that's
Yeah.
the toughest thing to do. We have another question. Acha, this is just for the participants. If you have any more questions, we have 12 minutes to go. If you can raise your hand, we would unmute you. And if you want to write down the question here in the chat, you can please do that as well. So we are just taking the questions that has already come to us before the webinar, but we are open to questions as well for the coming 12 minutes. Please feel free to ask questions. So, ma'am, we have another question, that is, there's this person who feels that she has spontaneity in the emotional experiences and everything, but there's specific people she talks about, her father, her brother. So how I can see is she has mentioned the male counterparts of the family. So she says that whenever they talk to her in a manner which she perceives as rude, her eyes start to tear up, and she fails to respond to it assertively or even respond to it. She shuts down. So how can she deal with it?
Okay. It somehow feels that this is a potential trigger for this person. If you notice, all of these people that she is talking about, these are opposite gender individuals, like father, brother, partner. I'm assuming that all of these are from the opposite gender. And probably this is a trigger that the person has. So firstly, there are certain past wounds that the person needs to heal, past wounds that the person needs to work on. Probably there are some negative experiences or some negative association that has already been created based on the kind of relationship she shares with the first opposite gender figure in her life. It could be the father, grandfather, whoever the person is, and probably that is the pattern which is being repeated in every other communication. So anything which has any resemblance to those situations that she has faced in the past, that is triggering her and is bringing up a similar physical sensation. So congratulations to you for at least being able to figure out that this is a significant trigger. This is a significant and potential trigger. Now you need to work on it. Where does it stem from? Where did it start? And then try and work on it. Probably therapy could be helpful.
Right. There is another question that a person says that she has panic attacks. She experiences panic attacks whenever she feels upset, and like she has to use inhalers to help her breathe through that. So she's asking how can she deal with these extended overwhelming situations that she experiences.
Okay. I'm assuming that she has been told by someone that these are panic attacks, because panic attacks, anxiety attacks, these seem very similar but are different. So the first thing is, I think she needs to go to an expert professional, to a mental health professional, actually figure out whether this is at all a panic attack or an anxiety attack. That's the first step forward. Whichever it is, what are the sort of situations in which she is having these attacks or episodes? That will give the person a cue regarding what's really bothering the person so much. And slow breathing exercise. There are a lot of activities which can help. For example, I can share one or two now. One is known as candle breathing, that you just take in the breath and you leave it with your mouth. So doing it slowly for maybe 9 to 10 times, that could help. Another technique is 4-7-8. Like with this space, 1, 2, 3, 4, you breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you exhale. So these things can help with the sort of physical sensations which tend to pile up when someone has these sort of attacks, But for addressing this in a sustainable manner, just not handling it situation to situation, I think she or he, whoever this person is, should address it in therapy, should talk with a mental health professional.
Absolutely. And we have a few more questions that you've already addressed. Like some people have asked about how to build a habit of regulating emotions and everything. So there is one last question that I would like to ask from the already taken question. That is, what is the role of negative self-talk and the feeling of worthlessness in the field of emotional regulation?
Yeah, that has a huge role to play. That's one of the reasons why when you are not emotionally regulated, it actually leads to these sort of conditions like depression. Like as we know, when you have depression, there's already an underlying low self-esteem, self-inflicted guilt. You tend to blame yourself in every situation. So that actually plays a huge role. So again, when we engage in negative self-talk, so much of critical talk about ourselves, it doesn't happen in a state of vacuum. That also is probably some sort of learned behavior, or is a part of the kind of parenting style or attachment style that we have been used to. A lot of times what we see is when probably one of the parents or one of the attachment figures have been critical, that becomes your internal self voice. Like after a point, it's not your parents who are criticizing you, it's your inner critic voice which is criticizing you all the time. So that is something that you have got to figure out, that it's coming from your past, and it's not accurate, it's not right, it's just something that you have been exposed to, habituated to, and work on it very effectively. Like for instance, in this situation, if I feel from a critical perspective that, let's say, on a scale of 0 to 10, I am probably at 4 in terms of my performance, what will my rational part say? Like, what will my rational mind say? Is it at 4 or is it somewhere else? So, doing this sort of inner dialogue with yourself is also important, because we all have parts. Critical part could be one part of ourselves, but there are, of course, other parts also. There are kinder, compassionate, rational parts of ourselves as well.
Right. We have a question from Nivedita ma'am here. That is, after the passing of her father, whenever something difficult happens, she feels lonely and she wishes that her father was here. And so, how would she be able to overcome from this feeling of loneliness? And yeah.
Okay. How long has it been that she has lost her father? Is it already been a year or so?
Nivedita ma'am, would you like to speak? Yeah, she's here.
6 years. It's 6 years running.
6 years. Okay, 6 years. Okay, so I think this is a grief that needs to be addressed. Like, this is something that probably you still haven't come to terms with completely. Like, and it's difficult. Like, grief leaves a gap for a lifetime. That's there. Like ওই মানুষের জায়গাটা তো অন্য কিছু দিয়ে কোনোভাবেই পূরণ হবে না, কিন্তু এই যে অ্যাকসেপ্টেন্স এর জায়গাটা, সেটা হয়তো এখনো কমপ্লিটলি আসে। হ্যাঁ, তো মেবি ট্রাইং টু ওয়ার্ক অন ইট, দ্যাট ওকে 6 বছর আগে যখন বাবা ছিলেন তখন আমার যখন এরকম ফিল হতো, তখন বাবাকে বললে আমার ভালো লাগতো, কিন্তু এখন আমি ওই জায়গাটায় কি করি? এখন তো আমাকে সেইটার কিছু অন্য কোপিং স্কিল খুঁজে বার করতে হবে। সো প্রবাবলি ইউ হ্যাভ টু অ্যাক্টিভলি ওয়ার্ক অন দ্যাট, দ্যাট ওকে লাইক দিস ওয়াজ মাই সেফ প্লেস 6 years ago, বাট প্রবাবলি আই হ্যাভ টু ক্রিয়েট আ সেফ প্লেস ফর মাইসেলফ। হ্যাঁ, তো ওটার উপর একটু খুব কনসিয়াসলি কাজ করা, যে না মানে আমি কাদের সাথে থাকলে লোনলি কিছুটা কম লাগে। বাবা থাকলে যেমন লাগতো সেরকম হয়তো লাগে না, কিন্তু একটু কম লাগে। কাদের সাথে তাও আমি শেয়ার করতে পারি, একটা এরকম জায়গা নিজের জন্য তৈরি করতে হবে।
I think এরম সেশনস আমাদের খুব কম হয় যেখানে we can actually come up and ask something that is so close to us that kind of helps us, unveil ourselves kind of. So thank you for being there and allowing us the space to be here. And I think we don't have any questions anymore, so we can wrap up. And of course, we would love to have you here with us in a very in-person, personal setup very soon. And to wind up the session, I would request our Dr. Amrita ma'am to please take over from here. Thank you, Anisha ma'am. See you very soon again.
Thank you, Anisha. It felt like a therapy session. So the talk was so therapeutic. And it was like coming up with practical solutions. I mean, ways of life that we can actually implement, we can use to deal with our emotional regulation and emotional ups and downs. So it was wonderful to have you, but this 1.5 hours, it's not enough. So definitely we will love to have you in person soon with with longer sessions and solutions for our listeners, for our participants. And I mean, while you were talking about emotional regulation, I could feel, and I'm sure even the participants felt, that it's not a talk that you are delivering. It's an experience. It's a way of life for you too. And it's also so important for all of us to understand that these are not strategies. This is a work in progress, and this is a way of life that we tend to adopt. So thank you for being with us today. It's our pleasure, DeepRanjani's pleasure, to have you today for this webinar. Thank you to all the participants, to the wonderful participants, for being patient, for listening to Anisha ma'am's wonderful talk. And I'm sure you will be extremely benefited by the discussion that we had, the techniques that ma'am discussed today. And thank you to the DeepRanjani team, the technical team, the capacity building team, Priyanka, Olivia, and everyone else behind this screen who made it possible, who are making it possible for such a long time. We are looking forward to have many more such sessions going ahead. And Anisha, once again, our sincerest gratitude. It's been a wonderful experience to have you today here.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to have this platform. It's such a good work that you're doing. Being attached to it in any way makes me feel good as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not an individual work, it's a collaborative work. So the participants here, you, all of us from DeepRanjani, we are in one team. So let's I mean, put up the spirit of the teamwork.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Shubho Dipaboli Shobaike, Happy Diwali. Wish you all a wonderful, colorful, bright Diwali, and enjoy yourself with your family and your loved ones. And do not forget ma'am's suggestions, the warm hugs, and the balms that ma'am mentioned, and use it. It's going to be a very special Diwali. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you all soon.